Hey guys, my name is Ashton Gleckman, and in today's video we're going to be talking a little bit about recreating scores and the sort of amazing potential it has to not only expose you to new music and sort of teach you how a great film cue is written in context with the story, but also really expose you to new techniques having to do with harmony, orchestration, and overall musical craft. So I host a series on YouTube called Behind the Score, and essentially what it is each episode is a case study of a certain film score. And for each episode, we pretty much will arrange and recreate a suite of music from that specific score. Look at the harmony, the orchestration, the way that it's constructed. We'll go in, we'll dive in and take a look at how it was sort of recorded, the team behind the score, the themes used by the composer to sort of help tell the narrative. And with each one, you take home something completely different. Even with just one composer, like I've done a few Alexandre Desplat scores, and even though they're all by the same composer, they're so incredibly different because the stories are all different. Same thing with Hans, Last Samurai is so different from Inception. Inception is so different from Interstellar. And musically speaking, he's exploring all different types of different techniques, whether it's church organs versus big brass hits or, Japanese instruments, or, each score you take home something completely new, and it really adds a whole nother level to your musical vocabulary. Now let's talk about the three main reasons why recreating scores can be extremely helpful. And the first reason is exposure. Now there's so many different composers out there, whether it be Hans Zimmer, Rupert Gregson-Williams, James Newton Howard, Harry Gregson-Williams, Junkie XL, Roque Banos. There's so many of them who each have their own backgrounds and their own sounds. They work on different scores. And when you analyze each different composer or one of their projects, you'll begin to get sort of different techniques from each. Now the next thing is musical craft. Now there's so many different ways in the modern day of getting information, whether it's books, professors and universities, sort of web classes, YouTube. There's so many different approaches to it. And one of the great things about recreating scores is that you're looking at it from the source in a very, very practical, upfront way. So things that move you emotionally, you're figuring out how it was done, so then you can sort of take that with you and put it on your musical tool belt. And with each composer, you get something completely different. You can look at Desplat and his amazing use for like very minimal but complex textures and his use of flutes. If you look at James Newton Howard and his amazing soloistic writing abilities. If you look at Hans Zimmer and his amazing attention to detail and sort of the production and the sonic world that he creates, or Harry Gregson-Williams with his choral writing and his suspensions. There's something so different from each composer that you can get, and not only from a narrative point of view, looking at how composers work in film, but looking at the actual musicality and how their sort of musical language comes through. That's another plus of recreating scores. Now the next thing is musical impact on the narrative. Now stories can sometimes get pretty complex, with films like Interstellar and Inception, 2001: A Space Odyssey, or new things like Haunting of Hill House, where it's jumping between different points in the story. And sometimes it's relatively hard to sort of follow that progression. We just did a score called The Imitation Game on BTS, and it might seem like a relatively simple story on the surface, but when you go into it, it's not only just about a guy who ended the war by 2 years by breaking the Enigma code, but it's about his own experiences, the people around him, their experiences. It's of course about the war, but then you have 3 different timelines that it's jumping between. So actually it's way more complex than it is on the surface. And the subtext and all that, really, really interesting stuff that it dives into, the music really can help with that. And the way that Desplat develops all these really cool textures, those are things that you can just, again, put on your tool belt. In terms of steps, the first thing is find a score that you really love, that you can relate to on an emotional level, that you really want to understand better. Second step is arrange. Now, if you're starting out recreating scores, I would recommend starting with one piece. So if you're doing, Shawshank, do the Stoic. If you're doing Inception, do Time. If you're doing Interstellar, maybe do, Day One. So pick one piece that you really, really enjoy from a score that you really love. And then as you sort of progress, I know as I progressed, I did 2 and then 3, and then eventually went on to doing 7 and 8 for the big behind the score episodes. But really pick pieces or sequences that you really enjoy. Now the next thing is listen and watch. Now, I would recommend watching the film a couple of times and watch it once, just watching it again for fun. To really just sort of get reintroduced into that movie, and then watch it again with the sole purpose of looking at the music and how it's placed, how it's spotted, when the composer brings in a certain theme, etc. And then go back to just the score and listen to it multiple times and do multiple listening passes. So do just the harmony, what's playing the melody, what are the textures going on beneath, how are these all working, What's the composer doing contrapuntally to really help create an interesting texture. And so just each time you listen for something different, and that'll really help the process go a lot smoother. Now the next thing is try to figure out a little bit more about the recording of the score. Where was it recorded? I approach scores that were recorded at Air versus recorded in LA a bit differently in terms of the mix. Sean Murphy and his work at Warner Brothers versus Jake Jackson and Alan Meyerson, a lot of the scores that they've done at Air Studios. You might approach it just a little bit differently depending on where it was recorded. How many instruments were used. On Inception, that was really helpful because I was trying to figure out the brass configuration, and once you figured it out, you could very, very easily help recreate that sort of texture. Now the next thing is focus on the production, because depending on where the score was recorded, the strings can be very bright or very warm. The horns can be very sort of Vienna-ish or London-ish. You can have very compressed drums or very sort of natural drums. And so it all really depends, and the production is a very sort of strong part of the identity of different scores. Desplat's scores are always very dry and upfront, and that's really part of the recording process and the production of it. So really focus in on that, and that'll help you with your score recreation. But the next thing is one of the most important steps of the whole entire process. I still do it to this day, tons, and that is ask for feedback from your peers, your friends, or your family. Send them the track, send them the original as well, and just ask them, how does it match up to the original? How's the sort of expressiveness of it? Does it feel realistic? Is there anything wrong that you sort of noticed upon listening to it? And that'll actually really, really help you, and it still helps me to this day with all the suites that I do, because they'll be like, yeah, the horns are off at 2 minutes, the strings are really, really bright at 5 minutes while they actually shouldn't be if you listen to the original score. Why are you over compressing the drums? So yeah, the power of advice is probably one of the most important aspects of this all. But there is just a little insight into recreating scores. So thank you guys so much for watching. If you guys are interested in Behind the Score, you guys can find seasons 1, 2, and 3 on my channel. Do be sure you subscribe to the GCN channel. There's a lot more coming soon. But anyways, thank you guys so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you guys next time.